Welcome, everyone, to our 14th Travel Talk Live presentation. Today, our speaker is Mary Crawford on Weeds, Friends, and Foes. I'm your moderator, Nancy McDonald, and Rebecca Last will be taking care of watching your questions on chat, and we'll get to those later. Mary, we were very happy to welcome to the Master Gardeners of Ottawa-Carleton in the summer of 2020. When she was completing her second horticultural course on maintaining the garden, she grew fascinated with the subject of weeds, and especially how native and non-native plants impact our environment. She hopes you will find some useful takeaways from her talk today. Over to you, Mary.
Thank you, Nancy. Well, the concept of a weed is a very interesting one, and a lot depends upon your perspective. It is not a precise scientific term, but rather a cultural idea, and generally considered to be a plant growing where it is not wanted. But of course, this begs the question, not wanted by whom? For the home gardener, unwanted plants challenge our aesthetic. They're just maybe not our idea of what is beautiful. They create unhappy competition for limited light, space, water, and soil nutrients. And of course, they are a huge make-work project. For farmers, many wild plants have an economic impact by diminishing outputs, sometimes by up to 50%, which is a huge amount and has real implications. Corn, soybean, wheat, barley, and strawberries, for example, all take a hit from various thistles. And some plants are poisonous to livestock or can taint their milk, such as creeping buttercup. Hikers, as well as farmers, want to watch out for other noxious plants, such as giant hogweed and wild parsnip. You can see the giant hogweed here on the left. This is a picture from mid-May, already out in full bloom. Both of these plants are similar to Queen Anne's lace, but the difference is that the giant hogweed does not have the little red center, little red floret that the Queen Anne's lace does, and wild parsnip is yellow. But the thing that makes these two plants really concerning is that they have a sap that is called phototoxic. So it means when the sap, so if you break the stem and it's exposed to the light, it can create serious chemical injury, give you painful skin rashes, even cause blindness. And of course, there's poison ivy, which appears along a lot of pathways right now and creates a very nasty rash as well, as you may be unfortunately familiar with. The government of Ontario has a list of noxious weeds, which I have put in a handout that you can find if you go look for the link in the chat. This is the Ontario Ministry of Agriculture, Food and Rural Affairs, has lots of noxious weeds, and anyone who has these on their property, they're legally responsible to try to control them. Our birds and insect populations are also stakeholders in our consideration of weeds in ways we haven't always given much thought to. We discovered rather late that monarch butterflies, in fact, need the milkweed that we worked so hard to eliminate. The growing discovery that the decline of native plants has harmed birds and bees gives us cause to reflect on our role as gardeners. We wonder now, maybe we have too many decorative plants, not enough food left behind for the birds and the bees. Can we leave some areas to go wild? Do we need to make friends with some of the weeds that we have tried so desperately to get rid of? And another stakeholder, which I hadn't really thought of before fairly recently, is that of the forest. You can see here, this picture shows periwinkle growing at the base of a tree. And this is a picture from a hardwood forest that we used to live near. And I thought, seeing this, at first I thought, oh, that's just the forest being green. But in fact, This periwinkle is a non-native invasive species, just one of many we've now got in Ontario, and is causing all kinds of problems. So first of all, just to clarify those definitions, non-native means that it was introduced from elsewhere, typically Europe and Asia. Many of these things were brought here by settlers wanting their familiar foods, flowers, medicines. But now many of these problem plants have been and continue to be brought here for purely commercial purposes and sold as decorative ornamentals. Invasive means that something is aggressive and capable of taking over. The problem beyond simply just taking over an area is that animals often don't recognize these plants as food. They don't obtain quality nutrition from them. The nectar isn't what they're used to, and doesn't. In some cases, there have been problems with eggs, shells on eggs being diminished, weakened because the animals have fed on non-native plants. And interdependence with other plants, which we are only really just coming to start to understand, including with trees, is disturbed in our native forest by these non-native plants. So we'll turn now away from the stakeholders, or rather perhaps to if you're a wild food enthusiast, you may find yourself thinking, yes, okay, here I see myself represented, because the next three weeds we're going to look at are all edible. Particularly the leaves and the stems are what you'd want to be eating on these. The first one is lamb's quarters. Chenopodium album is its Latin name. It is an annual, so it springs up new each year from seed, and it is found everywhere. It is a powerful competitor, and agricultural and horticultural producers consider this plant to be their worst weed. In a survey in 2016, it was voted #1. It looks rather innocent here, but it's capable of growing very tall, very wide, and claiming all the nutrients in the midst. The other side of that is that it does have an excellent nutritional profile, and the taste is really quite lovely. So it does taste a bit like spinach, totally fine in a salad. It's actively cultivated in some areas, particularly some areas of the world, but it isn't really something that we want to keep cultivating here, in terms of the problems that it is for farmers' fields. So my recommendation on this is pull it before it gets too big, definitely before it sets seed, but do give the tender leaves a try. Don't think you'd be disappointed. Another edible summer annual is purslane, and purslane loves the heat, and during the recent heat waves, it has sprouted everywhere. It regrows easily from pieces of root left behind when pulled. It can reproduce even when severed from the roots, and estimates of its seed count per plant per season is as high as 240,000. Seeds can also last in the soil up to 40 years. Don't get blasé about this one like I did. Pull it routinely. Throw it in a salad or blend it up in a pesto if you like. I'm not as keen on the taste just straight out of the garden of this one. Somebody described it as tasting like mucilage, and that gluey taste, it's kind of there. So take it, eat it, but put it somewhere you're not going to notice the taste too much. The third plant in the edible series is a biennial called garlic mustard, Oleracea petiolata. Now, it's hard to know what to say about this to begin with, so I started with the words "eat the invader," because it does have so many good qualities in terms of an edible. It is very rich in all kinds of nutrients that you can see listed here. John Callis in Edible Wild Plants just thinks this is a great plant, but what he says is the problem is we don't eat enough of it. The problem is it is hugely invasive. It is causing all kinds of problems in forests in the United States. North American forests are really struggling with this right now. It does have a strong garlic scent, by the way, so it's unmistakable. If you pull it up, you're gonna know what you've got. It is capable of dominating the understory of forests and completely wiping out all the native plants underneath. It is thought to exude toxins from its roots and diminish soil richness. Research is ongoing around this plant, but on my walks, I've noticed that it seems to accompany some not such nice companions. In this case, you see behind it is the giant hogweed with the phototoxic sap, and the burdock, which has those burrs that get all over you. So yeah, it's just does look very concerning with and even around wild parsnip as well. So now we'll turn to some friends of ours, and these next two plants are both native plants. Garlic mustard, by the way, is a non-native, came from Europe. Doesn't seem to be a problem anywhere else, but you know, because it's non-native to Canada and the United States, it is. Whereas goldenrod is a native. And for years and years, of course, goldenrod was considered a weed because it blooms at the same time that ragweed does, which causes hay fever. So it gets blamed for it because it's the bright plant in the meadows. But it is in fact an important source of nectar for our birds and bees and butterflies. It shelters the larvae of beneficial insects, the ones we want around. It draws away the pest insects, the ones we don't want around. It is native, and there are many different species of it. For a consideration of these species, I recommend you highly to Gillian Boyd's article in the 2020 issue of Trail Talk, where she talks about different types. They can be slim or full-figured, rigid or flexible, have plumed or club-like flat top flowers. There's likely one that will work well in your garden, and something really to consider. Another native plant friend that was listed in my horticulture course as a weed is the evening primrose. It has so many virtues, though, for both humans and our pollinators that it's hard to think of it as a bad thing that we wouldn't want. And of course, see this beautiful photo that Nancy McDonald took of a swallowtail on the evening primrose. Shows how attractive it is to butterflies, also to birds and hummingbirds and moths. People extract the oil to treat inflammatory and other conditions, and it is considered to be of special value to bees by the Lady Bing Johnson Wildflower Organization has particularly noted Oenothera biennis as a beneficial to bees. It does self-seed, so you do need to watch its rather aggressive tendencies in your garden too. But the real ones that for me in my backyard garden, the ones that I want to call weeds, are plants that were once deliberately set in as ornamental ground cover. These plants all have grown in my garden, and they're extremely hard to get rid of. And so you see that this photo here, let's see if I can use this, Siberian iris here with lily of the valley and the creeping bellflower in here as well. And had to take out the entire plant in order to be able to disentangle all those roots. Because the thing about these roots is, oh my goodness, do they mean business. This is the root of the creeping bellflower, which is, you see this right here. It doesn't even look like it belongs to it, but the root is growing out of it. It's a swollen part of the root that then produces this plant here, this little plant, which pops up in the garden and you think, oh, okay, pull it out. But if you just get that much, then you've left this whole big thing in the ground, and it's going to continue to produce this plant and spread all over your garden. Here's some roots that were growing underneath a patio stone. This is lily of the valley. When you think you put down patio stones or whatever and you keep the roots out, it's not really the case. So lily of the valley and periwinkle were growing like mad in my backyard. And as well, creeping jenny, which looks very nice in a hanging basket, but I don't want it in my garden. And it's taken over areas. Now that I have removed a significant portion of it, I see some of the native plants popping back up in this area in my yard that's kind of woodland type. In here, bugleweed, when I first saw it, I was kind of blasé about it. I let it expand and really have come to regret it. It may be nice in a contained area of the garden, but if you let it get beyond you, it's very, very invasive. So I don't know whether bugleweed or creeping jenny is going to win out. It's like battle of the invasives. And over here, goutweed, well, it's gotten in among my rows where it's very hard to get out, but we do our best. So stolons mean stems that kind of can leapfrog out and establish rooting systems on top of the soil. Rhizomes are root runners that run out and underneath, like you saw with the lily of the valley. In the handout, I have put a number of resources on invasive plants because it is kind of the topic of our times to get familiar with it. If you scroll back in the chat, you will find the one with the link in it. Click on the file name to open it, save it to your computer if you want to keep it. And if you have any problems or you're watching later on YouTube and you want a copy, just email at this address, mgoc.ttl@gmail.com for a copy of the handout. I've just shown here, this is one of the resources that I've posted onto that website is the name of the Ontario Invasive Plant Council and a link to it. They produce this wonderful brochure called Grow Me Instead. And Grow Me Instead has a list on one side of plants that are problematic that we don't want here, and on the other side, plants that we can grow instead. So I highly recommend that to you. I also recommend to you the YouTube of Master Gardener Heather Clemenson's recent Trail Talk Live, which now on YouTube. She did an entire session on invasive plants in your garden. No talk on weeds, no matter how brief, would be complete without mention of the dandelion. And for me, this plant, non-native but long-established perennial in North America, I have come to see as much an annoyance as anything. As plants, they keep to themselves much better than creepers, and by this time of year, they're completely gone. They're just a bunch of green in the soil. They are edible for bees. They pollinate early. For the pollinators looking for something early on, there's the dandelions are up. I've seen geese eat them, and we are able to eat them from the top to the bottom. And I really like the fact that the roots, when dried, can be used in a tea to, apparently it's a tonic for the liver, which the Indigenous people discovered and have shared with us. If you really want to try to control the dandelions in your yard, I would recommend giving grass the edge by top dressing with organic material aerating, and overseeding. The seed, although it certainly looks like it's capable of going long distances, is actually fairly short-lived in the lawn. So the more that you have, the more grass seed and other things you have, the less you're going to have the dandelions come up. And of course, mowing in a timely fashion keeps the neighbors happy. Finally, our weeds ourselves. It's hard not to end this presentation without getting a little bit philosophical about weeds, given all the various stakeholders and all the considerations that we have in mind with plants. A very dear neighbor once said, "Oh, Mary, who cares? They're green." And to a considerable extent now, I think she's not that far off the mark. Um, Even the most weed-choked piece of land is still a piece of green into which water can flow. And even the most vile weed is bringing down nutrients from underneath, bringing them up to the soil, or up to the soil level. So maybe we don't see them so much as enemies as messengers. Maybe they're a mirror of ourselves and our activities. In any case, I think I will end it here and see if you have any questions. Thank you.
What an interesting talk, Mary. Thank you so much. We did have a couple of questions on control. And actually a very interesting comment from Marin, and I can't read her last name, but she notes that purslane can be used on sunburns in the same way that aloe vera does.
Oh.
So that was a new one to me. She said she's tried it and it works.
Cool. Well, it has so much water in it, eh? And it's so like pulpy, kind of like aloe.
Yeah, and it's got a kind of jelly center, very similar to aloe vera. So I can see that being an interesting alternative. I thought that was a very cool comment. Question about bindweed control, and I did find and share the Oenothera link on field bindweed. My experience with this little brute is that it's got very weak stems and really strong roots. And if you keep taking the top growth off, eventually those roots will weaken because they're not being fed anymore. But if you have a better idea for controlling it, I'd love to hear it.
Yeah, well, a bindweed was one of those. I think in my recent horticulture course, I think, don't they say bindweed roots can go down very, very deep, and the seeds again last a long time in the soil. So I've not had any personal experience dealing with bindweed. So good luck. Yeah, just
that
keep
was
at
kind
it.
of my response too. It's not an easy one to deal with. Another question about periwinkle around a lilac bush. Will it prevent the lilac bush from growing and producing more? My feeling was probably not, but I've had a little patch of vinca, and it's been in the same very small space for about 4 or 5 years, but this year I noticed it was starting to spread. So I've taken to ripping pieces of it out, because once it starts to spread, it's a really aggressive grower. So my suggestion was to replace the bindweed with something native, like maybe Canadian ginger. And again, maybe you have some thoughts you'd like to share on that.
Well, for me, once I know a plant is not really beneficial to our ecology, I feel less inclined to be supportive of it as a plant. But I don't think that the periwinkle is going to. I wouldn't think it would be causing a problem to the lilac itself. Probably just means that nothing else can grow underneath or around it. So I wouldn't be so concerned. And I know my sister has a patch of periwinkle that she's devoted to. And, as long as it's contained, it's not going to be going anywhere or harming anything else. So, Yeah, I don't think I'd have a problem with that patch.
Yeah,
Periwinkle.
the opportunity cost, I think, is probably the best argument for getting rid of it. If you do get rid of it, you've got space to plant something native that will support wildlife.
Hmm.
And that's actually a follow through on another question from a lady called Mary. Is vinca considered a weed? And it is considered an invasive plant now. So to control it, just pull it out, or any other strategies for controlling vinca?
Its roots are quite, they spread quite rapidly, but yeah, just pull it out. And I mean, over a couple of years, I don't find it as bad as goutweed. And yes, I believe periwinkle is listed in the Grow Me Instead brochure by the Ontario Invasive Plant Council. Which isn't a government organization, by the way. It's a private one, or it's a public one, a non-governmental multi-corporation. But they do have a lot of interesting ideas for. It gives you a lot of hope to see what else you can plant instead of these things.
Yeah, I found their plant lists are quite inspirational, actually. Question from Carrie: what are your thoughts on a no-mow lawn? So I guess the kind of
Well,
meadow type of lawn.
yeah, no, interesting. I mean, I put this last slide in here because I noticed it in my neighborhood actually, and I thought, oh, that's interesting. Like that's the side of their house, and these people are just letting these weeds, letting these plants grow up, and so it's very interesting. I mean, with a meadow, you still need to mow it once a year so you don't have your trees growing up. I mean, how able are you to turn it completely over into growing into whatever trees and so on will be there? With the concern about the non-native plants, I still would want to look at that collection of plants in the yard and see, well, do I have any that are going to be really problematic? On my own lawn, we don't mow it all the time, and we've never really tried to eliminate anything using herbicides. As so, I've got a lot of plants that are in fact non-native growing in there. I like to see them pop up, and even the non-native ones, I enjoy seeing them, but I kind of keep an eye out to make sure they don't get out of control too.
Good point. And a few years ago, the Master Gardeners visited a naturalist who lives out in the far west end of Ottawa, and he had converted a lot of his front garden to a wildflower meadow. It wasn't all native, but he was working hard to make sure that it was mostly native. And my goodness, the habitat that he was able to create there was wonderful. A couple of last questions, because I see our moderator is about to call time.
We've got 2 minutes left.
Okay, so really quickly then, the difference between Portulaca and Purslane. Portulaca is the genus name, and there is an ornamental Portulaca that produces very pretty little multicolored kind of cactus-like flowers. That's one that you might see for sale in your garden center. Purslane is a different kind of Portulaca, same genus, different species. And then the last question: any tricks to get rid of creeping Jenny in a lawn?
Well, if you find out, let me know. Yeah, I would like to hear what other people have to say about that.
It's well, I don't have any lawn left, but I do have creeping Jenny on several of my paths. And for me, it's just a question of, I rip it out when it gets out of control. It's not a great ground cover plant because of the way it sort of loops. It can create a little bit of a tripping hazard, but it sure is one tough plant. And right about now, it's got those little yellow flowers all over it. So again, if it's not spreading too far, it's it's okay in my books, but ripping it out is probably your best bet, and that's a challenge. Lots of thank yous for your talk, Mary. A lot of people found that really interesting, including me. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Maria. It was really enjoyable. I didn't know. I learned today that creeping buttercup could be something that a dairy farmer wouldn't want because of the flavor to the milk and that. So that was very interesting. If anybody has questions at any time, remember the Master Gardeners always have an email helpline. So questions can go there if you're finding some weeds that you didn't ask about today. And join us next Tuesday for Water Source of Life with Julianne LaBreche. So thank you, Mary and Rebecca, and thank you all for joining us.